Okay, we're going to jump right in then. We are in 2 Samuel, chapters 13 through 15. And in chapter 13, we're going to deal with the sin and murder of Amnon. It came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Now, both Absalom and Tamar were David's children by a gal by the name of Maachah. She was the daughter of King Geshur, and so, interestingly enough, both of them are half Jewish and half Gentile, because the wife was Gentile. We'll talk about that when we're through talking about Absalom, but Amnon, of course, was David's son by Ahinoam the Jezreelitess. So these kids have different mothers, in other words. Abram and Sarah are examples where we have children of the same father by different mothers, and that was sanctioned by the early Hebrew custom, even though it was forbidden subsequently in the Levitical legislation, Leviticus 18:9. In verse 2, and Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and Amnon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. They probably had very few opportunities to really see the unmarried members of the royal harem, and probably had none to see than Tamar alone. So we go to verse 3. Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, he was the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very subtle man. He said to him, "Why art thou, being the king's son, lean from day to day? Wilt thou not tell me?" And Amnon said unto him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." And Jonadab said unto him, "Lay thee down on thy bed, and make thyself sick. And when thy father cometh to see thee, say unto him, I pray thee, let my sister Tamar come and give me meat, and dress the meat in my sight, that I may see it, and eat it at her hand." So Amnon lay down, made himself sick, and when the king was come to see him, Amnon said to the king, "I pray thee, let Tamar, my sister, come and make me a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat at her hand." And David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go now to thy brother Amnon's house and dress his meat." And it's pretty clear that these kids lived in different houses, and probably each wives probably lived with her children in a particular compartment or section of the palace. Couple of cakes phrase, it's a Hebrew word for cakes, is from the root ibit, which is heart. And so there's probably, there might have been heart-shaped cookies, or there may just be a play on words here in any case. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was laid down, and she took flour and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and did bake the cakes. And she took a pan and poured them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Have out all men from me." And they went out, every man from him. And Amnon said unto Tamar, "Bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand." And Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. And when she had brought them unto him to eat, he took hold of her. It said unto her, "Come lie with me, my sister." And she answered him, "Nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. And I, whither shall I cause my shame to go? As for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee." Now this is a very controversial passage, because it sounds as if there might have been the possibility of them marrying, because of in their brother or sister, it's through the different mothers and so forth. So scholars have some debates about that. The law actually forbid this kind of marriage in Leviticus 18:9, but it might not have been strictly observed at this time. The Talmud tries to overcome the apparent difficulty here by assuming that Tamar was of some illegitimate birth, but there's no textual basis for that. Anyway, howbeit he would not hearken unto her, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her. Now this loss of virginity was an unbearable burden or curse in Israel. Deuteronomy 22 deals with that in some depth. And furthermore, relationships between half-brothers and sisters were also strictly forbidden by law in Leviticus 20. And the people who were guilty of those things were to be cut off from the covenant community. They took this quite seriously. And of course, in this case, Tamar was innocent, and she had been assaulted here. And again, Deuteronomy 22 is your background verse if you want to get into the background there. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, which demonstrates this passion wasn't of love, it was just lust. But anyway, so that he hated her, wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. And Amnon said unto her, Arise, be gone. And she said unto him, There is no cause. This evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou didst unto me. But he would not hearken unto her. Then he called a servant that ministered unto him and said, Put now this woman out from me, and bolt the door after her. And she had a garment of divers colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. Then a servant brought her out and bolted the door after her. It's interesting, this coat of many colors is just an incidental comment here. Same kind of comment was made of Joseph, if you will, in an earlier time. But anyway, it signifies something special, but it's strictly one of conjectures, what might really be implied by that in the text. And Tamar put ashes on her head, and rent her garment of divers colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went on crying. And Absalom her brother said unto her, Hath Amnon thy brother been with thee? But hold now thy peace, my sister. He is thy brother. Regard not this thing. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. His putting her out from his immediate presence and repudiated her as a bride. See, the law in Deuteronomy 22 would imply that he should have married her after all this, but her intensity of sorrow is pretty well communicated here. And there are detailed instructions in Deuteronomy 22 and elsewhere, so I'll let you just put that in your notes. And so in the interest of time, we'll let you track that out on your own. Verse 20, And Absalom brother said unto her, Hath Amnon thy brother been with thee? But hold now thy peace, my sister. Absalom is really harboring deep antagonism towards Amnon, but you're going to discover that he's very patient. He's going to watch his opportunity to wreak his vengeance. By Absalom telling her just to keep still, he's hiding he gives no inkling of his feelings towards Amnon. But he was nursing his wrath, obviously, and biding his time to avenge his sister's wrongs. You should recognize also Amnon is an heir apparent. So Absalom's going to take care of him before this is all over with. Verse 21, And when King David heard of all these things, he was very wroth. And Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. It came to pass that after 2 full years, think about that, for 2 years he just lets this lay, watching his opportunity. It came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shearers in Baalhazor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, Behold, now thy servant hath sheep shearers. Let the king, I beseech thee, and his servants go with thy servant. And the king said unto Absalom, Nay, my son, let us not all go, lest we be chargeable unto thee. He pressed him, howbeit he would not go, but blessed him. Then said Absalom, If not, I pray thee, let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said unto him, Why should he go with thee? But Absalom pressed him, and he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, Mark ye now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say unto you, Smite Amnon, then kill him. Fear not, have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. Amnon, by Absalom hiding his animosity, David didn't realize that there was an agenda here, because after all, several years had gone by. Yeah, okay. And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man got up from his mule and fled. And it came to pass when they were in the way, the tidings came to David, saying, Absalom hath slain all the king's sons. Not one of them was left. Now that's misinformation. That's the first reaction, was since they all left, he thought that the word got to David that Absalom had killed them all. You can imagine what that did to David. He obviously was inconsolable. Even later on, when he finds out that the report is unfounded, and it was only Amnon, he still could not be comforted. David's obviously really upset to have this trouble in his family. But you may recall, let's just stop and recall. You remember what Nathan told David when he confronted him over Bathsheba and all that? That the sword would not depart from your house. And so this just is part of the trauma that characterizes his family. Verse 31, Then the king arose, tore his garments, and lay on the earth, and all his servants stood by with their clothes rent. And Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, answered him and said, Let not my lord suppose that they have slain all the young men and the king's sons, for Amnon only is dead. For by the appointment of Absalom, this hath been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. And what he's saying, in effect, that this was, the die was cast back then. And by the way, this is the guy that advised him to do this. So, in effect. Now, therefore, let not my lord the king take the thing to his heart to think that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon only is dead. But Absalom, of course, fled. And the young men that kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there came much people by the way of the hill behind him. And Jonadab said to the king, Behold, the king's sons come, and thy servant said, So it is. It came to pass, as soon as he had made an end of speaking, behold, the king's son came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all his servants wept very sore. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Amminahud, the king of Geshur. He's got a family relationship there because his mother was the daughter of the king of Geshur. You got the picture? And so David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled. Now, part of the tension here, or confusion, is David's ambivalence towards Absalom. He doesn't punish him on the one hand. He doesn't forgive him on the other. It's an ambiguity that festers and creates further problems as we go here. So Absalom fled, went to Geshur, and was there 3 years. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. So he's with his maternal grandfather. Geshur is east of the Sea of Galilee. It approaches Damascus. That's going to be important for some analysis we're going to do a little later. The law, as regarding premeditated murder, which you see, he can't call this a crime of passion. 2 years it went by. He was plotting and scheming this, obviously. In Numbers 35, verse 21, the law is pretty clear. And it gave him no hope of immunity in his own country. So he fled to outside. See, the cities of refuge could afford him no sanctuary because he was, it's not manslaughter, it's premeditated. And so he left the kingdom and he took refuge in the court of his maternal grandfather, who would probably approve of his conduct for lots of reasons. Okay, and this area, Geshur, it's a region northeast of Bashan, and it borders on the Syria of Damascus. And I won't go through the rest of it. It'll be in the notes that you have if you want to get into that. It'll be significant later. To try to get a little perspective of these strange relationships, here's a list of some of the wives and some of the sons. See, Amnon was a son of David, but from Ahinoam, and Absalom, and also Tamar, of course, from Maacah, who was a daughter of the king of Geshur. So yes, they're related, and yet there's a distance, obviously. We're going to hear in the next couple of chapters a great deal more about this guy Absalom. Now, what does his name mean? Anyone? What does Abba mean? Father. What does Shalom mean? Peace. So what would Absalom mean? Father of peace. Okay. We might try to make something of that a little later. He was a worthless fellow, we'll discover. But something else you should understand, to understand the dynamics here. The father of Bathsheba was a guy named Eliam. And of course, Uriah married Bathsheba, but David took care of that, as you recall. Absalom will rebel against David forthcoming. Ahithophel turns out to be one of David's counselors, but he turns and becomes Absalom's counselor in his treasonous rebellion. And you won't understand it all until you realize that Ahithophel was the father of Eliam, who was the father of Bathsheba. So Ahithophel is the grandfather of Bathsheba, and one can infer, at least, that he never forgave David for the murder of his son-in-law and for the dishonoring of his granddaughter. And so he's going to be the one that's behind the scenes in Absalom's rebellion. So watch for that. So chapter 14 of 2 Samuel, we're going to talk about how Absalom's continued estrangement from David. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, now remember Zeruiah was the daughter of an Ammonite that David ended up marrying, but she had previous sons. So Joab was one of those previous sons. So that's why you'll always see him just denoted as the son of Zeruiah, which is, yes, Zeruiah was the wife of David, but Joab wasn't the son of David. Okay, stepson, I guess you call it. Now, Joab obviously is close to the king. He knows his moods, and he realized that his heart was toward Absalom. He'd like to forgive him, like to have him back. Absalom's in exile. See, it's a real dilemma, because if Absalom comes back, he should be punished, unless the king will openly forgive him, pardon him. But that creates political problems too. So the ambiguity is part of the cloud over this these episodes that follow. But Joab's got a plot here. Joab sent to Tekoa. Remember that's a place that later prophet Amos will come from. But anyway, and he fetched thence a wise woman and said unto her, I pray thee, feign thyself to be a mourner, and put on now mourning apparel, and anoint not thyself with oil. Be as a woman that hath a long time mourned for the dead. And come to the king, and speak on this manner unto him. So Joab put words in her mouth. So this is all being set up, obviously. And when the woman of Tekoa spake to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and did obeisance, and said, Help, O king. And the king said unto her, What aileth thee? She answered, I am indeed a widow woman, and mine husband is dead. And thy handmaid had 2 sons, and they 2 strove together in the field, and there was none to part them, but the one smote the other and slew him. And behold, the whole family is risen against thy handmaid. And they said, Deliver him that smote his brother, that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom he slew. And we will destroy the heir also. And so they shall quench my coal which is left, and shall not leave to my husband neither name nor remainder upon the earth. And in their culture, this was a big deal. There's all kinds of laws to raise up children to a dead husband and so forth. And so this is the situation that she's presenting to the king. Now, get the sense here that King David is attached to Absalom, and he's not gotten over over the violent death of Amnon, and yet he was desirous to gain the society of his favorite son, which has now been 3 years since that episode, 5 years since the rape of Tamar. But see, the dread of public opinion and the politics involved caused him to hesitate about either recalling and pardoning his son, but see, Joab's trying to contrive a situation to create a path that can resolve the struggle between parental duty on the one hand and the royal duty on the other. See, David clearly missed Absalom, but no one knew how to achieve Absalom's return and a reconciliation. So this is Joab, his tactics, trying to get this whole thing resolved. Now, so the woman contrives a story where she had a single surviving son that would be vulnerable to the blood vengeance at the hands of the firstborn. The kinsman redeemer would be after him. The avenger of blood, the same guy. And since she's a widow, this would eliminate her source of support and also the future. So that's what this burning coal idiom is dealing with here. But aside from the fact that she has no support, the more serious thing is that she have no surviving name and memory of her dead husband. And that was considered in that culture the most dreaded of all misfortunes. That's why they had concubines, and that's why they had levirate marriage, and all those things were instituted to forestall that kind of a possibility. Okay, so the woman of Tekoa continued. The woman of Tekoa said to the king, My lord, O king, the iniquity be on me and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless. The king said, Whosoever saith aught unto thee, bring him to me, and he shall not touch thee any more. So King David obviously is touched by her thing and stands in the breach, if you will. So he empowered the woman to bring her prosecutors into his royal presence. Then said she, I pray thee, let the king remember the Lord thy God, that thou wouldest not suffer the revengers of blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. And he said, As the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of thy son fall to the earth. So that seemed appropriate to him, makes sense. The woman said, Let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak one more word unto my lord the king. He said, Say on. So she's not sure she's made her point, so she's going to press further. And what she's saying, if there's any miscarriage of justice, her family would bear the responsibility. David patiently hears her out, assures that if anyone tried to prosecute her, he would have to answer to the king. So she continues till she elicits from David a formal oath that her accused son would not suffer even the slightest harm. In verse 13, the woman said, Wherefore then, hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God? For the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty, in that the king doth not fetch home again his banished. For we must needs die, and are as water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Neither doth God respect any person, yet doth he devise means that his banished be not expelled from him. So we got some editorial perspective here. Now therefore that I am come to speak of this thing unto my lord the king, it is because the people have made me afraid. And the handmaid said, I will now speak unto the king, that it may be that the king will perform the request of his handmaid. For the king will hear and deliver his handmaid out of the hand of the man that would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. For thy handmaid said, the word of my lord the king shall now be comfortable, for as an angel of God, so is my lord the king to discern good and bad. Therefore, the Lord thy God will be with thee. And the king answered and said unto the woman, hide not from me, I pray thee, the thing that I shall ask thee. The woman said, let my lord now speak. The king said, is not the hand of Joab with thee in all this? So David sees through the situation, the logical position he's been maneuvered into, and he recognizes that this is the hand of Joab. Joab has contrived this to try to create a means by which a face-saving way, you might put it, to have Absalom returned. Anyway, he says, not the hand of Joab with thee in all this. And the woman answered and said, as thy soul liveth, my lord the king, none can turn to the right or the left from aught that my lord the king hath spoken. For my servant Joab, he bade me, and he put all these words in the mouth of thine handmaid, to fetch about this form of speech that hath thy servant Joab done this thing. And my lord is wise, according to the wisdom of the angel of God, to know all things that are in the earth. The king said unto Joab, behold now, I have done this thing. Go therefore, bring the young man Absalom again. So this whole situation was contrived to provide a path that the king would be in effect forced to do that which they knew was really on his heart anyway, to bring Absalom back into the realm. So Joab fell on the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. And Joab said, today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my lord, O king, in that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. And Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. Sounds like a good idea so far, right? Well, we'll see. And the king said, let him turn to his own house and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face. But in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot, even to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. This is a handsome young man, a very popular young man, and he's going to end up creating a major, major problem for David. Now, one of the things you can discuss among yourselves when you get groups is, what should David have done? How could David have avoided the terrible things that are going to continue out of all of this? Because on the one hand, he doesn't punish Absalom for murder. Doesn't want another of his sons killed. That would be the penalty. On the other hand, he doesn't reconcile with him either. He's in Jerusalem, but exiled from the presence of the king. So it's a strange tension that is going to fester and get worse and worse and worse. And you can argue that David could have done almost anything differently, and it might have had a better result than what happened. Speaking of Absalom, when he polled his head, for it was at every year's end that he polled it, because his hair was heavy on him, therefore he polled it, and he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight. The 200 shekels would be about 5 pounds. That's a lot of hair. The remark may be in here because of what's going to set the stage for Absalom's undoing, and we'll come to that. Verse 27, unto Absalom there was born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. He named his daughter also Tamar, so don't get confused. There's a lot of Tamars in the Bible. And one of your homework assignments will be to list them and contrast them. But anyway, whose name was Tamar, and she was a woman of fair countenance. So Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem and saw not the king's face. Therefore Absalom sent to Joab to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent him again the second time, he would not come. So even Joab, of course, is spurning Absalom. Absalom said, "See, Joab's field is near mine, and he hath barley there. Go and set it on fire." And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab rose and came to Absalom unto his house, and said unto him, "Wherefore have thy servants set my field on fire?" And Absalom answered Joab, said, "Behold, I send unto thee, saying, Come hither, that I may send thee to the king. Say, Wherefore am I come from Geshur? And it had been good for me to have been there still. Now therefore let me see the king's face. If there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me." Absalom's obviously pretty frustrated. He would have been better off, is still in exile in Geshur, in his maternal grandfather's domain. It was Joab's contrivance that got him to Jerusalem, but he can't see the king. So even Absalom's saying, either let me go, or for heaven's sakes, if I'm guilty, then have him kill me. Let's get this thing resolved, in other words. So Joab came to the king and told him. And when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king, and he bowed himself and on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. Sounds like things are getting better, right? Be careful, because Absalom's going to hold a rebellion and capture the kingdom. Verse 1 of 2 Samuel 15, "It came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him." So he's going to start a vigorous program to win the loyalty of the tribes. Not the tribe of Judah, the home tribe, so to speak, but the others. He's going to meet people in the court, and at the gate of the town was always it's like a courthouse in a sense. He would find out where they came from. He would find out what their grievances were, and he would create the impression, boy, if he was king, they'd have a better lot. So let's go on, verse 2. "And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate." The gate of the city, again, is the place where business is transacted and so on. "And it was so that when any man had a controversy, came to the king for judgment, then Absalom called on him, saying, Of what city art thou? He'd say, Thy servant is one of the tribes of Israel. Absalom said to him, See, thy matters are good and right, but there's no man deputed of the king to hear thee. In other words, there's no one been set up to deal with your problem. Absalom said, Moreover, Oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man which hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. It was so that when any man came nigh to him to do him obeisance, he put forth his hand and took him and kissed him." So this guy, Absalom, is not only a handsome fellow, he's quite a politician. On this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So Absalom's got a big, political machine going here. And it came to pass after 40 years, now I should explain, that's a strange remark. It's not 40 years of Absalom, but it's an allusion, apparently, that some of the text, the NIV renders it 4 years. See, for 4 years, Absalom had been weaning the people and so forth. The 4 years appears in the Septuagint and the Syriac version, the Peshitta. But the Hebrew has 40 years, so there's some figure, maybe it refers to an event earlier in David's life, perhaps his anointing at Bethlehem. There's a number of ways to try to deal with what may be just a textual issue. It came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. In Hebron, they still had a grudge against David because he had removed the seat of the government from there to Jerusalem. So they resented David in that sense. And also the allied clans of the Negev, the south, if you will, whose good offices David first mounted the throne, were jealous of the northern tribes. See, the southern tribes were jealous of the northern tribes, Hebron being in the south. And now the northern tribes are the dominant party in the United Kingdom, and so they have a lot of power and influence to the king. So there's a seat of bitterness down there in Hebron, and that's what Absalom is going to start to take advantage. And he claims that he did a vow unto the Lord in Hebron. He says, For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode in Geshur in Syria, saying, If the Lord shall bring me indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. And the king said to him, Go in peace. So he rose and went to Hebron. So he's got to discharge apparently his vow. That's just an excuse to get down there and create the dissent that he can. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. So Absalom's going to try to take charge. He's going to start foment a rebellion here. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. They're in over their heads, in effect. Okay, the time is ripe for revolution. That's what's really brewing here. Now, when we reach Hebron is bitter on the one hand, but it's also symbolized the center of the Davidic dynasty, because that's where David had begun his reign and so forth. So it's an interesting place for him to announce his usurpation of power. Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor. Get this, he's David's counselor, but don't forget, he was Bathsheba's grandfather. So Absalom sent for Ahithophel, and from the city, even from Gihon, and he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. I want you to know these sacrifices and the vow, all of that, Absalom is coloring his political ambitions with as if it had some kind of religious purpose. I won't get into the details, but that's basically the flavor of what he's doing here. It's basically a rebellion, but he's trying to cloak it in religious terms. And anyway, in verse 13, there came a messenger to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said to all his servants that were with him in Jerusalem, arise, let us flee, for we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring evil upon us and smite the city with the edge of the sword. So David, when he hears that, he sizes up the situation and doesn't fight. He decides to try to minimize the damage. Now, this decision has been a puzzle to many of the commentators. Some suppose that his courage had failed. Some say that he had valid grounds for suspecting the loyalty of the population, which is still prominently Jebusite. Remember, Jerusalem was conquered from the Jebusites. Others feel that he just wanted to spare the city the horrors of a siege. Still others figured that if the revolt prospered in the north while Absalom was marching on him from the south, he would be caught in a trap. Because Absalom's coming from the south, from Hebron. If the northern tribes are with hearts with Absalom, David is caught in a pincher. You could say he lost courage, or is it just good generalship to make the move he did? Now the fact, in verse 15, let's look at verse 15. The king's servant said to the king, behold, thy servants are ready to do whatsoever my lord the king shall appoint. Their readiness, they didn't question the decision, their readiness to do this implies that his decision was not cowardice, it was just cold calculation of a very experienced military strategist. And that would be my leaning personally from looking at this. But anyway, the king went forth and all his household after him, and the king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house. Now understand, a concubine is a strange sort of secondary wife. These aren't harlots like some people would ascribe. These are people who had certain status, not full wife status, but they did have standing of sorts. So these are in many ways regarded as royal property. In any case, he left the 10 women to keep the house. And the king went forth, all the people after him, and tarried in a place that was far off. And all the servants passed on beside him, and all the Terites and all the Pelethites and all the Gittites, 600 men which came after him from Gath, passed on before the king. You know, there's an awful lot of foreigners that are bodyguards. That was and still is very typical, because there's a tendency often for royalty to engage professional non-residents as their Praetorian or special guards, because they're not ethnically rooted there, they're usually immune from the politics or ethnic strife. It sounds strange, but it was a very common practice, pretty time-honored practice to do it that way. And that's David was surrounded that way too. Then said the king to Ittai the Gittite, which is a guy from Gath in effect. These are all people that were loyal to him, but from the old Philistine days. Wherefore goest thou also with us? Return to thy place and abide with the king, for thou art a stranger and also an exile. And whereas thou camest but yesterday, should I this day make thee go up and down with us? Seeing I go whither I may, return thou and take back thy brethren. Mercy and truth be with thee. And Ittai answered the king and said, as the Lord liveth, as my lord the king liveth, surely in what place my lord king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also will thy servant be. This guy chooses, even though the king encourages him to go off and take his leave, he insists upon staying loyal to the king. David said to Ittai, go and pass over. And Ittai passed over, and all his men and all the little ones that were with him. And all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people passed over. And the king also himself passed over the brook Kidron, and all the people passed over toward the way of the wilderness. And lo, Zadok also and all the Levites were with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of the God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had done passing in the cities. Now, Abiathar and Zadok, these are both priests. I'll come back to that in a little bit here. The king said to Zadok, "Carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me again and show me both it and his habitation. But if he thus say, I have no delight in thee, behold, here am I, let him do to me as he seemeth good." In other words, David's ready to let God treat him as he will, but he doesn't want to compromise the ark, in effect. If it was God's will for him to return as a king, he will do so. But otherwise, there's no need to keep the ark away from the sanctuary, from the temple that's in Jerusalem. You see, it's David, not the Lord, that's going into exile, is his logic. There's two sons. Ahimaaz is Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. There's two sons of priests here. And they would, by having the ark go back, having them in Jerusalem, they become an intelligence network for David. They will bring back any insights of what's going on. And we're going to see an amusing incident involving Ahimaaz, who is a rapid runner, but rather vacant in terms of significance, as we'll see. It's kind of funny. But one thing that might be useful to do here, and that is understand Zadok is going to succeed as the key priest. The king said also unto Zadok the priest, "Art thou not a seer? Return unto the city in peace, and your two sons with you, Ahimaaz and your son Jonathan, the son of Abiathar. And see, I will tarry in the plain of the wilderness until there come word from you to certify me." Zadok therefore and Abiathar carried the ark of God again to Jerusalem, and they tarried there. Now understand it may be useful as we go forward to understand the lineage. Obviously, under Aaron, he had two sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. Under Eleazar, we had Phinehas, the first one, and a whole bunch of others. We get down to Zadok, whose son is Ahimaaz, and we're going to hear more about him. That's down on the one line. The other son, through Ithamar, came Eli. Remember, Eli had the two worthless sons, Hophni and Phinehas the second. They were bad news. Phinehas had two sons, Ahitub and Ichabod, and under Ahitub he had a number. But down you ultimately get down here to Zadok and Abiathar. They're major players here. But what you're going to discover is that, you remember in 1 Samuel 2, that because of the worthlessness of Eli's sons, that the priesthood would be taken away from them, and they ultimately are. And we're going to see when we get to 1 Kings chapter 2 that Abiathar expires, the priesthood. The priesthood will move to Zadok and will stay that way until the captivity and beyond. But all this was prophesied back in 1 Samuel chapter 2, you may recall. And so as we watch here now, the players will see. David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and he wept as he went up and had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went up. And one told David, saying, "Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom." And David said, "O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." It came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mount where he worshipped God, behold, Hushai, the Archite, came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. Now, this guy Hushai is going to be a good guy. He's going to line himself up with Absalom, but he's going to give Absalom bad counsel. He's going to dissemble, if you will, with Absalom. But he's a good guy, so we'll see. Anyway, he came with his coat rent and earth upon his head, and unto whom David said, "If thou passest on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. But if thou return to the city and say unto Absalom, I'll be thy servant, O king, as I have been thy father's servant hitherto, so will I now also be thy servant." See, that's what he wants him to say to Absalom. "As I've been thy father's servant hitherto, so I will now be thy servant. Then mayest thou be for me," that is David, "you may defeat the counsel of Ahithophel." Because see, Absalom's going to have two counselors, Ahithophel and Hushai. "And hast thou not there with thee Zadok and Abiathar the priest? Therefore it shall be what things soever thou shalt bear out of the king's house, thou shalt tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests." And of course, they'll be the channel back to David. "Behold, they have there with them their two sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son." Don't confuse Jonathan here with the Jonathan that was son of Saul. He's probably named after him or whatever, but different guy, obviously. "And by them ye shall send me everything that you can hear." And Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and Absalom came to Jerusalem. And so that sets the stage. We'll get the rest of it in the next session. To stand back and just get a picture here, we've seen David at his zenith. He was a very victorious warrior, very clever general, Remember, he subdued the Philistines to the west, the Syrians and others to the north, the Ammonites to the east, and the Edomites and Amalekites to the south. He also was a very good administrator. He's the guy that organized the priests in the 24 courses. That's important when you get to the book of Revelation for lots of reasons. And he's a major poet, wrote the Psalms and so forth. Interesting guy, but we're seeing him beyond his turning point. His great sin, of course, with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. All this is not just an incident. It's a culmination of a process. The prosperity, the ease, the self-indulgence, and so forth. But what causes God to say of David, despite these failures, is here's a man after my own heart, because he deals with his sins in repentance. That's what God would have of each of us. And it's interesting when you go through Psalm 89, you hear the echoes of all of this. I've made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn unto David my servant, thy seed will I establish forever and build up thy throne unto all generations. So we have David's rule is prophetic, if you will, of David's greater son, the son of David in the sense of the Messiah. And we went through, this is just by way of review, we went through a whole bunch of those passages through the whole Bible. It puts focus on the rule of the Messiah, but it does so through the lens of David. And I'm going to suggest before we're through, there may be some more subtle hints of an adversary, typologically mentioned before we're through. And of course, all of this is also underscored by Gabriel when he talks to Mary and announces that her child will inherit the throne of his father David. And we went through all of that when we were reviewing the covenant with David and so forth. And the whole world is going to go to war. It's out Psalm 2. Really, yet have I set my king upon the holy hill of Zion, and I will declare the decree the Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. And thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. So be wise, therefore, now, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. Now, we have here in Psalm 2, as we also have all through the book of Isaiah and elsewhere, promises that the whole world will experience the opportunity for redemption through Jesus Christ. But what was not visible in the Old Testament, that Paul has the gift of revealing to us uniquely, as he declares in Ephesians chapter 3, is there's a mystery having to do with Gentiles that was hidden in the Old Testament. It's called the ecclesia, the church. And one of the things that you're going to want to do is study your scriptures to really understand the strange uniqueness, the unanticipated treasures that are available to those people who are called the body of Christ. Very distinctive. The fact that Gentiles can be saved isn't the point. That's all through the Old Testament. But there's aspects of that were hidden from the Old Testament that Paul reveals in Ephesians 3. I'll leave you with that as a homework assignment. We'll move on to get ready for the next session.